Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into one of the most profound and sometimes puzzling texts out there, Laozi's Tao Te Ching, specifically Chapter 3. And this one, it's provocatively titled, The Government of the Sage.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, think about our world today. It often feels like this constant race, right? Competition for status, always wanting the next luxury thing, this endless cycle making us feel, I don't know, restless, anxious.
Absolutely. And what's truly amazing is that Laozi, we're talking over 2,500 years ago, saw something very similar. He observed these human tendencies.
And his solution, laid out right here in Chapter 3, well, it's radical. I think for a lot of us listening today, it might even sound, frankly, a bit controversial.
That's exactly why we need to dig into this. It's so crucial. We're going to try and unpack what Laozi really meant, especially those lines that, at first glance, they might seem a bit harsh, maybe even authoritarian.
Right.
Our goal here is to connect this ancient wisdom, this very old text, to the challenges you face today. Hopefully you'll see why it still resonates and maybe, just maybe, offer some surprising ways forward.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we need to start with the source. Let's hear the text of Chapter 3 itself. I'll use the well-respected translation by the sinologist D.C. Lau. Not to value men of worth prevents the people from competing. Not to value goods hard to come by prevents the people from stealing. Not to display what is desirable prevents the people's hearts from being disturbed. Therefore, in governing the people, the sage empties their minds but fills their bellies, weakens their wills but strengthens their bones. He always keeps the people innocent of knowledge and free from desire, and ensures that the clever dare not venture to act. Do that which consists in taking no action, and order will prevail.
Powerful words. Very direct.
Yeah.
And you could immediately see why people might react strongly. Lines like, weaken their wills, or keep them innocent of knowledge. I mean, the initial reaction is often, wait, is he talking about creating an ignorant sort of passive population?
Exactly. That's the worry.
But as we start to peel back the layers, I think you'll find Laozi's meaning is, well, it's much more nuanced than that. It's definitely not just a simple recipe for keeping people in the dark.
All right, let's delve into those layers then. Starting right at the beginning, his opening lines seem aimed at preventing social conflict, right? By managing these external things that stir people up.
Precisely. Take the first one. Not to value men of worth prevents the people from competing. Now, Laozi isn't saying competence or talent is bad. Not at all.
Okay.
What he's really getting at is the public spectacle. The whole business of labeling certain people as worthy and making it a prize to be won.
Okay. The performance of worthiness.
Exactly. When worthiness becomes this thing you display, this public honor, it inevitably attracts people who are just chasing fame, not actual virtue. There's a great historical example, actually, the Zhongyan shortcut during the Tang Dynasty.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, figures like Lu Kanyong and Du Yan literally pretended to be hermits living simply in the mountains. Why? Because it became known as a sort of recognized path, a shortcut, to getting noticed and gaining official positions and political power. It was pure performance.
Wow. So faking simplicity to gain status, that's quite something. And there's a really interesting nuance on this from Suzy, the Song Dynasty scholar, right?
Yeah, Suzy's point is really important here. He stressed that the sage doesn't get rid of worthy people or refuse to use their skills. The sage simply doesn't exalt them publicly.
So use their talents, but don't put them on a pedestal.
That's it. Suzy's own words were "au tu fais." It means the worthy are never not used, only not exalted. It suggests this really delicate balance, you see. Not extremism.
That makes sense, but not everyone saw it quite that way.
No. Ukiyu offers a more, shall we say, challenging interpretation. He argued Laozi didn't just mean don't revere the title of worthy, but actually meant don't revere worthy people themselves. Full stop.
Really?
You felt Laozi saw nature itself as the ultimate worthy thing, and any human displays of talent, however genuine, inherently provoke envy, jealousy, and ultimately harmful competition.
That's a much starker view.
It is. But the core idea, whichever interpretation you lean towards, seems to be about reducing society's obsession with status and the whole public performance of worth. Laozi clearly thought that fueled conflict.
Okay, that's a powerful idea, especially, thinking about our own celebrity culture and status obsessions today. Now, moving on, Laozi says, not to value goods hard to come by prevents the people from stealing. This feels very practical.
It's incredibly pragmatic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The logic is simple. If you reduce the perceived value, the allure of rare or expensive things, you directly lessen the temptation to steal them. If society doesn't worship luxury, why risk everything for it?
Less temptation, less crime. Straightforward.
And the next line builds right on that. Not to display what is desirable prevents the people's hearts from being disturbed. This means actively avoiding flaunting things that stir up greed, envy, or just that constant nagging desire for more.
Like keeping temptation out of sight, out of mind.
Pretty much. Think of the story about Zheng Shiji advising Emperor Han Wendai about his tomb.
Yeah.
He basically said, look, if there's nothing valuable inside, you don't need a fancy stone coffin because nobody will bother robbing it. The lack of temptation is the security.
That's clever. Are there sort of modern parallels we can think of?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine, say, a giant flashy billboard at a busy intersection advertising some incredibly expensive car. It's designed specifically to stir desire, maybe even envy. And while it might boost sales for the car company, it could also literally cause accidents through distraction, right? It disturbs the peace in a way. There's also a classic story from the Lushi Chongqi about a group of dogs.
Oh.
Yeah, they were living together peacefully. Then someone throws a roasted chicken, a highly desirable object, right into the middle of them, and bam, instant chaos. Fighting breaks out.
Ah, the desirable object disrupts the harmony.
Precisely. And this idea deeply influenced later thinkers. The Ming Dynasty scholar Lu Kun actually named his study the Far From Beauty Pavilion.
Far from beauty. Why?
Because he deliberately wanted to distance himself from things generally considered beautiful, enticing foods, sights, possessions, even fame. He believed these things lead to duo, which means excess, and excess ultimately leads to huo, or calamity, disaster.
So beauty as a potential trap.
Exactly. Lu Kun felt people are often blinded by beauty and don't see the hidden dangers, the potential for disruption and suffering it brings.
Okay, so Laozi advises controlling these external triggers. Status symbols, luxury goods, visible temptations. What then does he say about the sage's more direct actions in governing? He says to empty their minds but fills their bellies, weakens their wills but strengthens their bones. Let's try and break that down. First, empty their minds, shukisho.
Right, and this is probably one of the most misunderstood phrases.
Yeah.
It's crucial to grasp that this is not about promoting ignorance or making people stupid.
Okay, so what is it about?
It's about emptying the mind of things like cunning, scheming, anxiety, worry, excessive calculation. It's about achieving a state of mental clarity, almost like a radical decluttering of the mind.
Mental clarity, not ignorance.
Exactly. There's a fascinating Buddhist perspective on this from the monk Hanshan de King. He saw emptying the mind as cutting off what he called wangxiang siluzhixian, basically delusional thoughts and anxieties.
Delusional thoughts, like what?
Hanshan argued that things like wealth, sex, fame, fancy food, they are jupida benwukiyu, meaning inherently in themselves, they aren't objects of desire. Our craving for them, he said, comes from these delusional thoughts, these mental constructs we project onto them.
So the desire isn't in the thing, it's in our minds.
That was his point.
Okay.
And he called emptying the mind of these thoughts ba ben say wa, literally uprooting the source of human suffering. Get rid of the delusions, get rid of the suffering.
That's a really profound link between inner peace and how we react to the world. There's also that story about Kai Junmo's beard, isn't there? That illustrates this empty mind idea quite well.
Oh yes, the beard story. It's perfect. So Kai Junmo apparently usually slept like a log. No problems.
Right.
But one day the emperor, probably just joking around, asked him, do you sleep with your beard inside the blanket or outside?
Oh.
Exactly. Suddenly, Kai became acutely aware of his beard, where it was, what he should do with it.
Yeah.
And that night, he couldn't sleep a wink. Tossing and turning, fussing with the beard.
Because his mind wasn't empty anymore. It was preoccupied.
Precisely. An empty, unburdened mind brings peace. But an yuyi, an intentional, preoccupied, self-conscious mind brings disturbance. It reminds me of the poet Bai Yu, who wrote about having a mind like an empty space which makes you immune to fate's twists and turns, allows you to live with adaptability.
A mind like empty space. I like that. Okay, what about the next part? Weaken their wills. Fayukis. This sounds even more problematic, maybe.
It does sound harsh, I agree. But again, we need to look deeper. This isn't about crushing the human spirit or making people docile in a negative way. It refers more specifically to weakening that relentless, driving, competitive ambition that Laozi saw as causing so much social strife.
So weakening a specific kind of will, the aggressive, competitive kind.
Yes. And it's interesting, the word used for weaken, hero, in Taoism often carries connotations of flexibility, resilience, yielding. Think of water.
Ah, like the soft overcoming the hard.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Water seems weak, but it can wear away stone and adapts to any container. That's the kind of adaptable weakness or flexibility in the will that's likely intended here, rather than a rigid, brittle ambition that just snaps under pressure.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's about resilience, not just being weak.
Right. And Hanshin Decking, whom we mentioned earlier, he argued that people's wills become overly strong and rigid because of external temptations. If leaders themselves remain pure and don't constantly dangle carrots, he thought, people's wills would naturally soften and align with a more peaceful, balanced state.
So it links back to controlling those external desires again.
It all ties together.
And then there's the really practical foundation for all of this. Fill their bellies, strengthen their bones. Shikifu kankigu.
This is absolutely fundamental for Laozi. Before you even think about people's minds or ambitions, the sage has to ensure their basic physical needs are met. People need to be fed, secure, healthy. That's the bedrock of peace.
You can't have inner peace if your stomach's empty or you feel unsafe.
Exactly. It's deeply pragmatic. And Hanshen added another layer to strengthening bones. He suggested it also implies self-sufficiency through honest work, through labor. He used the phrase Zhu Jing Er Yang Jing Tan or Shi, digging your own well to drink, plowing your own field to eat. It's about fostering a grounded, independent way of life.
That adds a nice dimension. It's not just about physical health, but about a connection to the basics of living. And Suji, you mentioned him earlier, he seemed to pull all this together quite nicely.
He did, beautifully. Suji said the sage achieves du-du, which means empty the mind without harming the full belly, weaken the will without harming the strong bones. It really highlights this wisdom of balance. Inner cultivation shouldn't come at the expense of fundamental well-being.
Okay, so if the sage manages external stimuli and ensures basic needs are met, what's the ultimate goal? Laozi says he always keeps the people innocent of knowledge and free from desire.
Right. And again, context is key. The knowledge, to be avoided here, isn't general learning. It's more like cunning, cleverness, used for manipulation or exploitation. Strategic cleverness,
Not wisdom, but scheming.
precisely. And the desire, and it's in basic human needs, but that insatiable greed, the kind constantly stirred up by societal pressures and comparisons. So it's really a call for a return to simplicity, contentment, a more natural state free from artificial complexities and boundless wanting.
It still sounds a bit like, keeping the people simple, maybe even fooling the people.
It can sound that way to us now, but one interpretation, sometimes called other interpretation too, offers really valuable context. It points out that during the incredibly chaotic spring and autumn and warring states periods when Laozi likely lived.
A time of constant warfare and upheaval.
Exactly. In that context, the state of being Uzivuyu, innocent of cunning knowledge and free from insatiable desire, wasn't necessarily seen as repressive. For ordinary people just trying to survive, it might have actually represented a dream, a path to peace and safety.
Ah, so less about control, more about escaping the dangers of a complex, warring world.
Possibly. This interpretation often points to the mythical Huaxu Xiziguo, the land of Huaxu described in the text Laozi. In this paradise, people supposedly lived without desires, fears, or suffering, precisely because they lacked that manipulative knowledge or cleverness. It was an ideal of blissful simplicity and profound peace, a stark contrast to the reality of their times.
That reframes it quite significantly. And the last part of that section, the sage ensures that the clever dare not venture to act.
Yes. The idea here is that in a society that has been, let's say, purified, where external temptations are minimized and internal delusions are calmed, those people who rely on cunning and manipulation simply lose their power.
Their schemes have nowhere to land.
Exactly. There's no fertile ground for their cleverness to take root because the conditions that allow it to flourish, widespread greed, envy, anxiety, have been reduced. They dare not act because their methods become ineffective.
Okay, this brings us to Laozi's famous conclusion for the chapter. Do that which consists in taking no action, and order will prevail. This is the heart of his Wu Wei Erji, governance through non-action. But non-action, Wu Wei, it doesn't just mean doing nothing, does it?
No, absolutely not. That's a common misunderstanding. It's far more subtle and, frankly, more complex than passive inactivity.
So how should we understand it?
Well, Suzy, whom we've mentioned a few times, actually had a very active interpretation of Wu Wei, which literally means doing non-action.
Doing non-action, how does that work?
Suji defined it as tuan ju hu wei, which translates roughly to using the natural functions of the worthy, of rare goods, and of desirable things. And this is the crucial part, without exalting them, without overvaluing them, without displaying them.
So it's not about eliminating these things, but managing how society interacts with them, working with their nature, but subtly guiding it.
Precisely. For Suze, wu wei isn't passive idleness. It's a highly skilled, very subtle, balanced form of governing that aligns with natural tendencies rather than fighting against them or trying to impose artificial controls. It's action that is so attuned to the natural flow that it appears effortless, like non-action.
That's a much more sophisticated understanding of Wu Wei. And didn't you mention something about the text itself, that maybe this famous phrase wasn't always there or wasn't always emphasized this way?
Yes, that's a fascinating point raised by the scholar Liu Xiaogan based on his study of those early silk and bamboo manuscripts that were unearthed.
For really old versions of the text.
Right. Liu Xiaogan suggests that this specific, very famous phrase, wu wei, might actually be a slightly later editorial addition or emphasis. He calls it a Sixian Zhuzhou, an ideological focusing.
Meaning someone later edited the text to really highlight this Wu Wei concept.
That's his hypothesis. He points out that some of the earliest silk manuscripts, the Boshu, seem to use a simpler phrase, something like shui, fu wei yi, which basically means just not doing, that's all.
Less philosophical, more direct.
Perhaps. Liu suggests this later, focusing on Wei Wu Wei, made Lao's core concept more explicit and central over time. He also notes another subtle textual difference. The placement of a single character, yi, in some early texts suggests that the line, always keep the people innocent of knowledge and desire, might originally have been read as a consequence or result of the sage's rule, rather than a direct command aimed at the jizi, the clever ones.
So it subtly shifts the meaning from actively making people simple to their simplicity being a natural outcome of good, non-interfering governance.
That's the potential implication Liu Xiaogan raises. It's a reminder that these texts evolved and interpretations can shift based on very small textual details.
Wow, that really shows how deep you can go with this stuff. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit, because not everyone throughout history just accepted Laozi's premise here, right? There were critiques.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most powerful critiques comes from the Ming King scholar Wang Fuzi. He fundamentally disagreed with Laozi's starting point.
What was his main issue?
Wang Fuzi basically rejected Laozi's idea that competition and conflict are solely caused by external factors like valuing worth or displaying goods. He believed conflict is more fundamental.
How so?
He used these really vivid analogies. He said, "Mamusheng reshra qi shuikibao," meaning rubbing wood creates heat, stirring water makes foam. His point was that interaction, friction, even conflict are intrinsic to existence itself. They arise naturally when things interact. They aren't just caused by external temptations.
So trying to eliminate competition entirely is like trying to stop wood from getting hot when you rub it. It's impossible.
Right. That was Wang Fuzi's argument. He believed that attempting to fundamentally cancel competition is futile because it's woven into the fabric of life and society.
Okay, and did he see a problem with Laozi's actual strategy of Wu Wei as well?
Yes, he pointed out what he saw as a major paradox. If Laozi's goal is for the people to become, in Wang's perhaps slightly critical framing, tat yone, kuna jandan, easy ronro, simple-minded and weak-willed,
Right.
then Wang asks, who makes them that way? How do they get into that specific state?
Achieving that state seems to require deliberate action.
Exactly. Wang argued that reaching this specific outcome, it must be achieved through active. Doing something means, if the ruler truly did absolutely nothing, which is one interpretation of Wu Wei, people wouldn't necessarily become simple and peaceful. They might just as easily become more cunning, more ambitious on their own.
So Laozi's method contradicts his goal.
That was Wang Fuzi's conclusion. He called Laozi's Wu Wei, at least in this context, something self-contradictory and ultimately unrealizable in practice. His point was essentially, Laozi wants a specific result, but claims to achieve it by doing nothing. That doesn't really add up. It's not truly passive non-action.
That's a really sharp critique. It forces you to think hard about what Wu Wei can realistically achieve. So, okay, we've got the original text, layers of interpretation, even fundamental critiques. What does all this ancient wisdom, these debates mean for us today? Does Chapter 3 still speak to modern life?
I absolutely think it does, surprisingly so.
Hmm.
Take leadership, for example. A wise leader today, you could argue, focuses on building a healthy collaborative culture, right? Not creating a star employee system where everyone's jealous and constantly trying to outdo each other.
Which sounds a lot like Laozi's not valuing men of worth, avoiding that public exaltation that breeds rivalry.
Exactly. And instead, that leader ensures everyone has the basic resources and support they need. They fill their bellies, metaphorically speaking, and they foster teamwork over ruthless, individualistic competition, which you could see as weakening the wills in that destructive, overly ambitious sense, aiming for resilience instead.
And what about on a personal level, for just, regular people trying to navigate today's world?
Well, Laozi's advice feels like a direct recipe for finding some mental peace in our hyper-consumerist, always-on culture, doesn't it?
Oh, so.
Emptying the mind. That sounds an awful lot like mindfulness.
Yeah.
Or maybe taking a digital detox, consciously stepping back from the constant noise and stimulation.
Clearing out the mental clutter, as you said earlier.
Right, and consciously avoiding the constant bombardment of advertising or the endless comparison trap of social media that seems directly related to not displaying what is desirable, or at least not letting ourselves be constantly disturbed by it. By doing that, we can maybe calm that restless cycle of always wanting more and find a bit more contentment with what we actually have.
It's like taking control of the inputs to find inner calm.
Precisely. And that other interpretation we discussed, other interpretation too, it really draws a direct line from Laozi's ancient concerns to our modern challenges, especially around these ideas of Shangxian valuing the worthy and Wu Yu being without desire.
Yeah, talk more about that. How does it apply now?
Well, think about celebrity culture today. You mentioned it earlier. We see millions, especially young people, often blindly following stars, sometimes leading to really extreme fan behavior, this constant flood of gossip news. It consumes so much energy.
It really does.
So does this modern form of Shangxian, this intense, often uncritical reverence for certain stars, does it maybe make a strong case for Laozi's Fu Shangxian, his call not to exalt the worthy in this way? Is it maybe not just relevant, but actually kind of necessary for a healthier society today? It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It challenges us to think about who and what we choose to elevate. And what about desire?
Same thing. Look at the luxury goods market. It's booming. This relentless pursuit of the latest expensive car, the designer bag, the high-end watch, the newest phone.
Mm-hmm.
Is this drive often disconnected from actual need? Maybe a kind of bingtai, a pathological or unhealthy desire? Perhaps Laozi's call for Wu Yu, being without desire, which we understand as being free from excessive, unnecessary, externally driven desires, isn't just some ancient philosophical point. Maybe it's actually quite urgent for our modern world, drowning in stuff, but often starved for genuine peace. It forces us to ask, what do we truly need to be content?
Those are powerful questions. And it leads nicely into a practical takeaway. We always like to offer something you, the listener, can try. So, inspired directly by Laozi this week, the desire audit.
I love this idea. It's very simple, but potentially very revealing. For just one day, try it for one day. Actively pay attention to your desires as they pop up.
What kind of desire?
Anything, really. A craving for a new gadget you saw advertised. A sudden wish for a different lifestyle you saw on Instagram. Even just a fleeting pang of envy when a friend gets something new. When that feeling arises, just pause for a second.
Okay, pause and then what?
Ask yourself, where did this specific desire actually come from? Is it a genuine need I have? Or was it sparked by something outside me? That ad, that post, that conversation?
Tracing the desire back to its trigger.
Exactly. This simple act of noticing helps you see how much of our inner turbulence, our sense of not enough, often comes directly from these external stimuli. It's a really powerful first step toward what Laozi called emptying the mind, clearing out those externally generated disturbances, and maybe finding a bit more genuine contentment right where you are.
The desire audit. I like it. A practical way to engage with these big ideas. So wrapping up chapter 3, it really offers this stark, almost severe, but ultimately profound vision.
It does.
Peace, Laozi seems to argue, doesn't come from adding more praise, more stuff, more ambitions. It comes from removing the artificial things, the stimulants that cause strife and anxiety in the first place.
It's a radical call, really, to get back to something simpler, maybe more authentic.
And he ends with that ultimate statement of his philosophy. Do that which consists in taking no action, and order will prevail. Wu-wei.
But even as we appreciate the depth of Laozi's insights, and certainly his deep yearning for peace in a chaotic world, It's also really important to acknowledge those other perspectives, like Yu Qiyu, whom we mentioned earlier.
Right, he had reservations.
He did. While he admired Laozi's Wu-Wei philosophy overall, he ultimately said he could not agree with a governance plan that might seem to aim at reducing people to, in his words, quo, Sindijian or Shentikinyan, simple-minded and strong-bodied beings. He felt it placed too much hope, perhaps naively, entirely on the wisdom and restraint of the rulers.
So where did Yukiyu stand instead?
He famously concluded, was Zanzai Mengzi Ji Bian, I stand with Mencius. Mencius, another great Confucian thinker, famously taught, Gui Shijiji Junwei King.
Meaning?
The people are the most important, the state comes next, the ruler is least important. A very different emphasis on the role and value of the people themselves.
That's a crucial contrast. It highlights the ongoing tension between approaches to order and individual autonomy. So this deep dive into Chapter 3 leaves us, and hopefully you, with a really compelling question to think about. How do you, in your own life, in your understanding of society, strike that balance? The balance between needing external order and inner calm, which Laozi emphasizes, and the undeniable importance of individual growth, knowledge, and autonomy, especially in our incredibly information-rich, desire-driven modern world. Where do you find that balance?
That's the question to carry with you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this exploration of Laozi's Chapter 3. Next time, we'll be diving into Chapter 4, where Laozi explores the very nature of the Tao itself, describing it as this vast, empty vessel. Seemingly empty, yet its use is inexhaustible. We hope you join us then.